A wise girl knows her limits. A smart girl knows she has none. I'd argue that should be the other way around, but either way. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I want to talk a little bit about limiting beliefs and relationships. This is a requested topic. Limiting beliefs are things, stories that we have in our head. They're usually controlled by our ego, which I have a lot of videos talking about ego versus soul. I won't delve into that too much, but it's usually those stories that like our ego likes to tell us that probably were ingrained in us from childhood or from, you know, a time in our past. Could even be ancestral, but they're these beliefs that we have that limit us from believing the things that we might need to in order to reach our full potential. Most of the time, these limiting beliefs come from other people, and they're stories that we've been told from other people that then we've taken on as our own. And this actually goes for men or women. This is literally just a human thing. We all have them. It's just based on our personalities and, you know, based on whether or not we are in our masculine or in our feminine, or, you know, we have any wounding or anything like that. Like, those are going to determine how we react to these limiting beliefs and how we deal with these limiting beliefs. But we all have them and they all exist, and this is just kind of like, it's a human thing. Say for example, we grew up with people telling us all the time that like all men are dogs or something like that, or there's no good men or something like that. Like we always hear this story in our head. We take it on as our own. So we start believing that if we're a woman, we start believing that like all men are bad because we've been told that all men are bad for so many years. If you're a man and hear that story, you're going to start to think that, well, you're a man, so you must be bad, and you may actually start doing bad things, or you might overcompensate and try to be a people pleaser because you don't want to be the bad guy, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like there's those limiting beliefs that then determine our later behavior because we're trying to fight those beliefs within ourselves. I can share some examples from my own life and my own experience, which hopefully will be helpful to some of you. So I have a background of dealing with a lot of verbal, emotional, and psychological abuse in my past. And there was a person in my life from a very young age. This was not a romantic partner. This was somebody in my life who was a male who was very psychologically manipulative. If many of you know people who are very psychologically manipulative, you call it narcissism or, you know, anything like that, they always have a laundry list of excuses for their behavior. Or they can deflect, but very often there's like a laundry list of excuses that they have to justify their bad behavior. And this particular person, if I would call them out on their bad behavior or set a boundary or try to express to them that something they had done was hurtful or that I didn't like it, even as a kid, their response was, well, this is just how men are. So like, this is what you have to deal with. So if you're gonna date men someday, or you're gonna grow up and you're gonna be in a relationship with men, this is just what you gotta deal with. So I grew up believing that relationships with men were very psychologically abusive. I didn't understand that that's what was going on at the time because I was just a kid. But I grew up believing, in fact, and I'm not proud of this, I've mentioned this in a few other videos, I'm not proud of this statement, but when I actually started understanding what narcissistic personality disorder was, and I read the criteria for what somebody with narcissistic personality disorder had, my first reaction was, I thought that's just what men were. Like, I did not understand, like, someone telling me that that was a personality disorder was so eye-opening for me because I didn't know men who weren't like that. Now, is every man that I've ever met in my life fall into that category? No, of course not. Like, I've known a lot of people in my life, right? I've met tons of people. Like, I used to work with large groups of men, so I'm sure not all of them were like that, but the men that I had closest to me in my life were all like that because that's what I perceived was normal behavior. It's what I was used to. I'm not proud of this again. This is just my experience, is because I had never experienced, I'd never seen a man make a mistake, own up to it, and then like apologize or make it right. I hadn't experienced that. I'd only ever experienced men who, when they made a mistake, they either just made up excuses, they deflected responsibility, or just got incredibly angry, or just rejected the whole idea that they had ever done anything wrong. That was my experience in life, and I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, I'm talking about just men in existence. And you know, the ego can jump in, and I do think that for most of us, ego jumps in and these things can happen. It doesn't mean that anybody that does that, who has an ego reaction to things, is automatically a narcissist or automatically abusive. I'm not saying that. However, if something like that is your only experience with, say, men, you're going to start to associate that behavior with that group of people, and you're going to start to think that that's just normal, or that's just how people are defined. So I just believed that this is how men were. So every time I got into a relationship, that's what the men were like, and it just seemed normal to me. It would seem abnormal for them to be different, even though I kind of wanted them to be different because it wasn't pleasant to be in relationships with people like that. But I didn't know any other way. So those are limiting beliefs that we can have about other people or the outside world. And there's tons and tons of examples. I'm just giving one from my own life, but there's just tons of other examples that can happen and about anything really. I once dated a guy one time who was convinced that women were incapable of doing push-ups on their toes. Like he really believed that the only way that a female could do a push-up is on her knees. Like he just didn't believe that it was possible. And I remember saying to him, like, yeah, of course it's possible. Like, it's harder for women because they don't tend to have as much upper body strength. But like, I've known plenty of women that could do that. I've done it, not well and not in a while, but like, it's possible. It's just they call them like girl push-ups because women don't tend to have the same upper body strength as men do, so they usually need to modify more likely. But there's tons of women that can do regular push-ups, but he just didn't believe that because he had that in his mind, that that was just how women were because that's all he had known. And you know, he was kind of sexist too, but not just because of that, but just beside the point. But anyway, limiting beliefs can also happen within ourselves. They very often come from stories that other people tell us about ourselves. For example, I mean, one of the ones I dealt with a lot in my life is if you're told that you're ugly or unattractive, either directly or indirectly with somebody's actions or with somebody's words, you eventually start to believe that you are unattractive. I mean, or anything, or not smart or things like that. I mean, for me, that was where a ton of my body image issues and my body dysmorphia and things like that always came from, was being constantly told either directly or in some way indirectly that I was unattractive. And I just believed that I was unattractive. It's still to this day something that I struggle with constantly, and being on social media, having everybody have an opinion about your appearance does not always help. But I've worked on that. I've done a lot of inner work on that. Those limiting beliefs can really exist within ourselves, and they can really mess up our heads because we end up believing things that aren't necessarily true about ourselves. Like that we're not attractive when we are, or that we're not smart when we actually are, or that we're not strong when we actually are. It's those stories that really keep us limited because we start to conduct our lives in a way that isn't really the fullness of who we possibly can be, because we have these beliefs that we are different from what we actually are. Another big wake-up call moment that I had in a past relationship was, this was something I didn't want to admit in myself, but we attract the person in our life who believes about us what we believe in ourselves. We want somebody who believes better, but we usually find someone who believes what we believe in ourselves. Like many people, myself included, struggle with the idea of not being worthy of love. So we seek somebody else to tell us that we're worthy of love, or make us feel like we're worthy of love, because that will validate us. We get that outside validation, but we then end up continuously getting into relationships with people who don't believe that we're worthy of love and treat us as if we're not worthy of love because that's what we believe in ourselves. That was a real wake-up call that I did not want to admit. I actually will admit in my very short marriage that I had several years ago, I had this belief pretty much my whole life that I was a burden. And anybody who's ever battled with things like depression or mental health or whatever will understand what I'm talking about. It was this sense of my own existence was just a burden on everybody. Just me being there, just being in a room, being around people was a burden. I really believed that. And I desperately wanted a man who would come into my life and tell me that I was not a burden on him. And I ended up in a marriage with a man who essentially believed I was a burden, told me I was a burden, not necessarily in those specific words, but with his actions and with a lot of the things that he said. He didn't specifically say you're a burden, but he definitely said things that were the equivalent of that. It just reiterated the things that I already believed in myself. And now me admitting that I attracted in someone who believed that about me because I believe that in myself, it doesn't excuse somebody else treating somebody like that. So I think sometimes we get caught up in this idea of it's either like the person who is the abuser and the person being abused. Like it's that victim abuser kind of mentality, whereas in reality you can both admit that it's not okay to treat somebody like they're not worthy, like they're a burden, to treat someone badly, and acknowledge the fact that there are things that maybe you have done as the victim of the abuse that is allowing this to happen, that there are limiting beliefs in you, that there's past wounding and unhealed trauma in you that is calling this into your life, that is allowing this to happen, and working on healing that. It doesn't make what the person did or how the person treated you any less wrong. It simply means that you can look at your part in the situation and move from there. I share this story in one of my other videos, but I came to the realization when my divorce was finalized that my ex-husband was leaving our marriage infinitely better than he was when he entered into our relationship. His whole life had improved, and I was the catalyst for that. And I know a lot of people are gonna say that that's conceited or whatever, or judge that, but like, it took me a long time to get to that place because I felt like a huge burden on his life for our whole relationship, and he allowed me to feel that way, when in reality so much of what he had in his life was because of me, because I was there for him, because I was supporting him in a lot of different ways. I was improving his life, and when I left that relationship, I learned things. I learned things and I grew, but I did not leave that relationship as financially stable as I was when I got into that relationship. I was 5, I believe the whole relationship was, years older. Learned a lot. It was a growing experience. I can appreciate it for what it was. I can appreciate the growth. I really do believe that I'm here on this path right now because of that experience. That said, his benefits were so great, and it was because of what I was bringing to the relationship. And I didn't see that throughout the whole relationship because I still believed I was a burden, and he perpetuated that belief because it was convenient for him for me to feel that way. These limiting beliefs are these beliefs that we have about ourselves that we've created from other people in our past, from things we've been told in our past. They really do destroy our relationships because very often we don't actually get into relationships fully owning our worth and owning our true full self, or get into relationships that are aligned with our true self because we're living from these limiting beliefs. So how do we work on these limiting beliefs? Now, there's not a clear cut, like, this is how you do it. I mean, a lot of these beliefs are ingrained in us. They are deeply ingrained in us. So like, there's not some like one size fits all, like, here's one technique, get rid of your limiting beliefs in 5 seconds. I've seen people who claim they can get rid of this stuff quickly and easily. I've worked with some people who claim that. I'm not buying it. Like, it takes work. It really does. There's not like an easy, you know, catch-all experience. And there's so many different ways. There's so many different healing modalities out there. Some that I've tried, some that I haven't tried, some that may work for you, or some that may work better for me, or this and that. Like, it's not a, we're all so multidimensional as human beings that's why there's so many different ways to work with this stuff, because certain ways are going to work better for certain people. I'll give you a few little tips to get started though. First off, awareness. It's super important to be aware of these limiting beliefs, because if you're not aware of them and you don't even know that they're there, you can't do anything with them. You're just gonna live life like kind of walking around in a fog and not knowing why things aren't working. So having self-awareness and really sitting down and realizing what those limiting beliefs are, and even getting to the root of them, figuring out like, who is the first person that told me that. That's super important. It's a great place to start. Honestly, this is where things like journaling or things like that can come in really handy, because when they start to come up, kind of jotting them down and then writing them out, and actually like writing out the reality, like, is this really true? In the beginning, you might actually believe that some of these things are true, but like the more that you write it out and the more you kind of come up with and realize reasons why these limiting beliefs are not true, and you kind of keep reinforcing that in your brain, it can really help. Also, actively paying attention to times when those limiting beliefs are not true. So an exercise that I did that was recommended to me is, you know, I had this belief that all men were a certain way. You know, all men were essentially narcissistic egomaniacs, and I had this belief because that's what I had experienced in my life. And somebody suggested that I actively go out and seek, especially following on social media or things like that, actively seek men who are actually working on themselves, who are actually good husbands and fathers, who are actually representative of the type of man that I really do believe a true masculine man can be. I find doing my film breakdowns, even though they're fictional characters, it kind of reinforces in my brain that like, oh, this is what masculinity is. There are men out there who are protectors and providers. There are men out there who embody those healthy masculine traits that I'm looking for. And every time you see that, it reinforces to your brain that those limiting beliefs that you have of like, all men are jerks, or there's no good men or whatever, like those things start to diminish. Now, other beliefs can start to come up. It can start to bring up other things. These are kind of like layers. You think about healing as kind of like peeling the layers. other things can come up. For me, one that came up was that a lot of the men that I was finding who were representative of some of these characteristics that I was looking for were usually in relationships. So it kind of reiterated that idea of like, okay, well, maybe there are men like that out there, but they're not for me. Like, they're for other women, but not for me. And then I had to move through that. To be totally honest, I'm still moving through that. We're all just works in progress. We're all just working on stuff. So working on that belief and working on those things, and then when new stuff comes up, just working on that belief. I also think it's really helpful to notice other people's limiting beliefs that you know are not true. Right? I mean, I see it a lot. I get a lot of comments, particularly on my social media, like on TikTok and stuff, even sometimes here on YouTube, where I get a lot of men that have these obviously very limiting beliefs coming from a lot of wounding or unhealed stuff about women, and they'll make these statements about women that I know are not true, right? Like, I get the most common one I get is like men talking about like, well, all women are cheaters, all women are cheaters, women are just looking to date up, they're all cheaters. And I'm thinking like, I've never cheated. Like, I've never been unfaithful in a relationship. I've always been incredibly loyal. And last I checked, I'm a woman. So I know that that limiting belief isn't true. So knowing that somebody else's limiting belief is not true, that it's coming from their wounding and it's coming from their judgments and their past experiences, but I know that that's not true because that's not my reality. It helps me to remember that, okay, well, if their limiting belief isn't true, then my limiting belief is probably not true too. It's like this man believes that all women are cheaters. I know not all women are cheaters because I'm a woman and I'm not one, which means that belief that I had in my head of like all men are narcissists is probably not true because other people's limiting beliefs are not true, right? It just kind of helps to retrain your brain to not see the world in this sort of limited sphere of everything is just the way that my brain has been conditioned to believe that it is. Because many of us, and I'm, you know, in just in families and generationally, but like the media and the way we've been manipulated by society in general, a lot of the stuff we believe is really not true. And a lot of the stuff we believe, I mean, I see it a lot when, you know, you start digging down rabbit holes, and like there's a lot of stuff going on in this world that is not what we think it is. So I think the more you start working on this stuff and the more you start realizing that some of these limiting beliefs that you've had are not true, it becomes easier for you to move through them. And, you know, I kind of get to a point now where when like another limiting belief comes up that I realize isn't true, I'm like, oh, another one. You know, in the beginning, it's a lot harder because in the beginning, you don't have that experience of actually shooting down those limiting beliefs. Sometimes you're not even aware of them. But once you start doing it, it does start to snowball, and you kind of like another one comes up and you're like, oh, okay, yeah. There's another limiting belief I can shoot down. So yeah, I have had some requests asking about limiting beliefs and how to work through them. It's really just a matter of being aware of them and then really being able to pay attention to the times when that limiting belief isn't true, because our brain likes to prove that it's right. Our ego likes to prove that it's right. So we kind of get into that mentality of like always pointing out the things that are the thing that our ego wants us to believe and not actually paying attention to the other things. So paying attention to those, and also realizing that we all have these limiting beliefs. We all do. And if you can point out when other people's are wrong, I mean, I don't mean point them out to them. I don't mean being like, that's a limiting belief and that's wrong. Like, most people probably don't want to hear that. Most people are probably not ready to hear that. So, you know, unless someone has actually come to you for help with that, I wouldn't go pointing it out to people. But you can point out in your own mind of being like, hey, that person's limiting belief is not true. I know it's not true. So mine probably aren't true as well. So yeah, and hopefully some of my stories that I've told you about my limiting beliefs, you've either identified with them, or maybe they're limiting beliefs that you don't have, and they've helped prove to you that people's limiting beliefs are sometimes and very often not true. So I really hope this video was helpful. I did have some requests to talk about this topic. So if you have any thoughts about this topic or any other topic requests, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you and I love your suggestions. If you found this video helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you're a woman and would like to learn how to communicate from your feminine energy, I have a new masterclass, which you can check out the details in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.